Hey there, 7th grade historians, and welcome to this explainer. Today, we're stepping out of the present and putting on our historical detective hats. We are digging into a massive, world-changing event, the founding of the United States. Specifically, we're zooming in on Unit 2, Lesson 2, Revolution and the Rights of Citizenship. But look, we aren't just going to sit here and memorize a bunch of dates and names today. No way. We're going to look at the exact evidence left behind by the people who actually lived it, and we're going to figure out exactly how they defined rights in a brand new nation. So grab your magnifying glasses because it's time to start analyzing.
Here's our roadmap for today. We're going to start by opening up the Historical Detectives Toolkit. Then we'll investigate a primary source, compare two different perspectives, bust a really common historical misconception, do a quick check for understanding, and wrap it all up with your DBQ challenge.
All right, Section 1, the Historical Detectives Toolkit.
If we're going to figure out why colonists decided to rebel against the most powerful empire on the planet, we absolutely need the right tools to analyze the primary sources they left behind. When you're investigating heavy topics like taxation and representation, you have to ask these 5 critical questions. First up, claim. What is the author actually trying to argue? Second, evidence. What proof do they offer to back it up? Third, perspective. What's their personal point of view? Fourth, audience. Who exactly are they trying to talk to? And finally, purpose. Why even take the time to create this thing in the first place? Using these 5 tools is what turns us from passive readers into active investigators.
Now, perspective can be a little tricky, but think about it like this. Imagine a controversial call on a sports game. A referee and a diehard fan are going to see that exact same penalty totally differently, right? Well, people in history are the same way. They saw events differently based on their own background. A British loyalist sitting in a fancy London mansion and a revolutionary colonist struggling to pay new taxes in Boston viewed the exact same tax law from 2 entirely different angles. Wrapping your head around this idea is basically your secret weapon for mastering historical analysis.
Moving right along to Section 2, Investigating a Primary Source. Picture this iconic rally cry pinned right to the center of our evidence board. No taxation without representation. You've probably heard it a million times. It was literally everywhere during the Revolution. But as detectives, we don't just read it, we interrogate it. How do we use our 5-part toolkit to crack what this really meant for the rights of citizenship?
Let's break it down using our tools. The claim, it's pretty straightforward. Colonists shouldn't have to pay taxes if they don't have a voice in the government. The evidence backing that claim? They hold 0 seats in the British Parliament. None. And the purpose of shouting this in the streets and printing it in every newspaper? To justify their rebellion and build support against laws they felt were entirely unfair. You see how much deeper we get when we actually interrogate the evidence rather than just glancing at it? Which brings us to Section 3, comparing 2 different perspectives.
You know, history is rarely one-sided, and the founding of the United States was incredibly complex. Just look at the massive contrast in how different groups defined rights during these early constitutional debates. On one hand, you have revolutionaries fighting tooth and nail for their own representation, loudly declaring that all men are created equal. But at the exact same time, the framers of the Constitution, and yes, some of those were the exact same people, made deep, troubling compromises to get all the states to unify. They made massive compromises that allowed the institution of slavery to continue and actually grow. One group is fighting for representation, while simultaneously actively denying it to an entire population to build a nation. As historians, we have to weigh both sides of this reality if we want to truly evaluate the consequences of these early debates.
Okay, let's tackle Section 4, a common historical misconception.
Before we go any further, we need to dodge a massive trap that catches a lot of novice historians. Take a second and think about this. Did all the founders agree perfectly on what rights of citizenship meant? Like, did they all just sit down in a room in Philadelphia, politely nod along to the rules, sign the documents, and head home for dinner with 0 arguments?
Absolutely not. The truth is, they argued intensely. Drafting these documents meant weeks of heated, sometimes really bitter constitutional debates. Northern states and southern states had vastly different economic interests, which meant vastly different perspectives. The final founding documents were not the result of a perfect unanimous vision. They were the result of heavy, massive, and sometimes deeply flawed compromises, especially those compromises surrounding slavery. Realizing that these rights were born out of intense conflict makes the history so much more accurate and, honestly, a lot more fascinating.
Let's pause for Section 5, a quick check for understanding. Let's test those detective skills for a second. If an author writes a pamphlet to convince colonists to rebel against a new tax, what is the author's purpose? I'll give you a second to think about which of our toolkit items this hits. Think about the difference between audience, claim, and purpose. Got it? The purpose is to persuade the audience to take action. It's not just to inform them, it's to start a literal revolution. If you figured that out, your historical analysis skills are absolutely on track.
Finally, Section 6. Your turn with a DBQ challenge.
All right, we've practiced using the tools, we've analyzed a quote, and we've compared some heavy perspectives. Now I'm handing the magnifying glass over to you for the final case of this unit. Here is your document-based question challenge. Why do people rebel, and how do societies define rights after a revolution? I want you to pull out your entire toolkit, claim, evidence, perspective, audience, and purpose, to investigate the primary sources we cover in class to answer this. And as you dig into that evidence, I want you to ask yourself one final critical question. How do those intense constitutional debates and flawed compromises of the past still shape the rights and representation we continue to debate today? Good luck out there, detectives.